August 1944, Eastern France. Lay shrouded in mist and damp air, the ground beneath tank tracks thick with the smell of mud, weeds, and gunpowder. On a field near the village of Aracourt, a line of M4A1 Sherman stood scattered along the edge of a chestnut grove, holes streaked with mud, scarred by soot and fire. From afar, the growl of Continental engines rumbled through the fog like weary beasts struggling to breathe, amid a battlefield not yet silent. In the lead tank, Lieutenant Clarence Smoyer, gunner of Company C, 37th Tank Battalion, 4th Armored Division, leaned down to check the M71 sight of his 76mm gun. Outside, moisture clung to cold steel. Inside, the air was thick with oil, cordite, and sweat, heavy enough to choke on. Smoyer was a quiet man. Before the war, he'd been a mechanic in Pennsylvania, more familiar with the clang of hammers and the smell of gasoline than with killing. Now, nearly 4,000 miles from home, he sat inside a 30-ton tank about to face what every Sherman crew feared most. The Panther, Nazi Germany's steel predator. Rumors about it had spread across Europe since Normandy. The Panther could shrug off 76mm shells without a scratch, its frontal armor to 80mm thick and sloped at 55 degrees, deflected rounds as if the steel itself rejected death. To the Germans, the Panther was pride incarnate. To the Americans, it was terror-made metal. Tankers told grim tales. Sherman shells bouncing off Panther hulls like pebbles skimming water. One hit, to the turret, useless. The second, another spark, and then the reply came. The Panther's 75mm KWK-42 El 70 cannon, tearing through a Sherman from over 1,500 meters away. Over the radio, distress calls were often cut short by explosions. Survivors recalled hearing a single dull thump, and then only fire. Smoyer had seen it himself in Normandy, a Sherman from his unit obliterated in 2 hits. No screams, just a bloom of flame in the rain of artillery. From that day on, the very word Panther sent shivers through every crew. They gave it a dark, half-joking nickname: the Black Cat. Commanders knew the truth. The Sherman's original 75mm gun no longer stood a chance. Even Tanua 76mm M1A1 could rarely pierce a Panther's front. The only hope lay in flanking. Shots to the sides, or rear a desperate tactic that meant letting the enemy get dangerously close. "We don't fight them head-on," a sergeant had warned during the pre-battalion briefing. "If you see a Panther in the distance, call artillery, or call God." The room had chuckled uneasily. Everyone knew it wasn't a joke. Across the lines, German crews placed absolute faith in their machines. The Panzerkampfwagen V Panther was the pride of Nazi industry, powered by the Maybach HL 230 P30 engine, capable of over 45 kilometers per hour, and equipped with precise Zeiss optics. 2 German officers. It was the perfect instrument. A tank that could face 3 Shermans and survive Sorrentos. 4th Armored Division advanced deep into Lorraine. They weren't just moving, they were stepping into a chess match of opposing philosophies. Mass production versus mechanical perfection. Quantity versus quality. And between them stood the men soldiers like Smoyer, small cogs of flesh caught between steel, smoke, and the razor edge of probability. That night, the fog was thick. Frogs croaked between distant echoes of German artillery. In the dim light of the turret, Lota John Derigi pulled out a single M62 armor-piercing round heavy, worn, black-tipped. He set it on the rack and muttered, "Let's hope it's enough." Smoyer just nodded, staring into the sight. A faint glow from the woods flickered across his face, the face of a man who knew that by sunrise, no one in that tank might still be alive. At dawn, orders came. Advance toward Aracourt. Outskirts. Recon reported a German panzer force moving in to count. The Shermans rolled forward, treads grinding through wet soil, leaving long, muddy scars across the earth. Smoke from burning villages mingled with fog, the scent of charred wood and diesel drifting across the fields. Smoyer popped the hatch and scanned the east. The sun was a faint orange smear devoured by mist. The radio crackled. Enemy armor spotted north, possibly. Patas, hold formation. Do not fire first. His heart pounded. Fingers tightened on the sight controls. The world seemed to fall silent. Only the heartbeat of the Sherman's engine and the faint tang of hot metal in the cold air remained. He knew if a Panther appeared first, it would all be over in seconds. Behind him, Dirigi whispered, "If we see one, you think we stand a chance?" Smoyer didn't answer. He just ran the numbers in his head. 800 meters, 55-degree slope, 80 millimeters plate. With standard rounds, impossible. With faith, maybe an illusion. That was the brutal reality of 1944. American soldiers sat inside tanks hailed as symbols of democratic strength. Yet one hit could turn them into fireballs. The Sherman was built to be mass-produced, not invincible. The Germans called it the Runsen. Lights up the first time, every time. And yet, they rolled forward anyway, because behind them lay France waiting for liberation. Fallen comrades, and a conviction that freedom was worth more than fear. In the dim light of dawn, the column of Shermans crept eastward, fading into the mist like ghosts of steel. None of them knew that only weeks later, on this very field, history would shift. A new kind of shell, small, bright, born from a lab in New York, would turn these ordinary Shermans into hunters. But that morning, to Smoyer, one truth remained. The Panther was still untouchable. He looked out and saw a lone bird gliding over the gray sky. An omen, or just exhaustion's trick. He exhaled, lowered the hatch, and locked it tight. In the darkness of the turret, his voice came steady through the intercom. "Take positions. We'll see it soon." Engines roared. Steel clashed. The Shermans crawled toward the east into fog thick enough to hide the hunters marked with the black cross. And when the first light broke, the world would witness the clash of two visions. Fear versus survival. Thousands of miles from the front, across the Atlantic, the winter of 1943 settled cold and gray over Watervliet Arsenal, New York. Inside the red brick buildings, the clang of lathes, the pounding of hammers, and the wind howling through factory windows merged into a single, heavy symphony of steel. Among hundreds of gray-coated engineers, a small group worked on something they called a super shell, a round they believed could change the fate of the war in Europe. The man leading them was Dr. Edwin T., a mechanical engineer formerly with General Electric. He didn't wear a white lab coat but a scuffed leather jacket, his hands always dusted with metal filings. On the cold steel table before him lay a small shell silver body, black tip, and a tungsten carbide core, a material harder than steel, used in industrial drill bits. Fleischer stared at it like a surgeon gazing at a scalpel that might save a life. He knew every part of it by heart. The light, aluminum body to reduce drag, the dense core to maintain momentum, the soft steel cap to prevent the tungsten from shattering on impact. It was the result of months of failure, cracked shells, shattered cores, warped casings, erratic flight paths. But that day, when the 76mm test gun fired its 12th round, the new shell punched clean through 160mm of armor at 1,000 meters. A stunned silence fell across the range then. Cheers erupted. Fleischer said nothing. He bent down, picked up a fragment of the tungsten core lodged in the steel plate, and smiled faintly. He knew what it meant. With this shell, a Sherman crew might finally have a real chance against a Panther. There was only one problem. Tungsten was rare, known also as wolfram. Tungsten was a dense, heat-resistant metal found in only a handful of mines, mostly in China and Burma. When Japan occupied much of Southeast Asia, those supply lines were severed. America had to rely on a perilous supply chain, or from Guangxi province carried by rail through Burma, then south to India, across the ocean to San Francisco. Every kilogram that reached New York had traveled thousands of miles, through jungles, battlefields, and sometimes through blood. The U.S. War Department faced a hard decision. They couldn't mass-produce millions of these shells. Instead, they prioritized anti-tank and armored divisions in Europe. In May 1944, just weeks before the first crates of M93 HVAP high-velocity armor-piercing rounds were shipped to England. Each wooden crate held only 25 rounds, sealed tight and stamped in red. Tungsten handled with care. In the supply depots along the coast, American soldiers examined the strange new ammunition. It looked nothing like standard rounds, sleek, silvery, longer, lighter, with a needle-sharp tip. Some joked it was silver bullets for German werewolves, but the laughter faded after the first test. The HVP shell tore through 80 millimeters of armor at a 30 angle, where ordinary rounds only dented. Its muzzle velocity exceeded 1,036 meters per second, so fast that by the time you heard it, the hole was already there. In London, inside the offices of the U.S. Armored Force, the test report landed on the desk of General Jacob Devers. The last line read simply, "Penetration performance equals British. 17-pounder at 1,000 yards. Recommend immediate production." But immediate was a relative term in wartime industry. Each HVAP round required over 30 machining steps, 6 alloys, and a tungsten core ground to a tolerance of 1,000th of an inch. Even with non-stop shifts, Watervliet could only produce a few thousand rounds a month. Each 76mm Sherman was allotted no more than 6 rounds. 6 fragile chances in a sea of steel. In France, by late summer 1944, the first HVAP rounds finally reached Sherman crews. When the crate was opened, loader John Darigi picked up a single shell, its silver tip gleaming like glass in the afternoon sun. He turned it over in his hands. "Heavy and cold. I think it really makes a difference," he asked. "It does," Smoyer replied quietly. "If God's willing, this might be the last thing we'll ever have to fire." In the rear lines, artillery officers were trained to distinguish HVAP rounds from standard ones. They were warned repeatedly. Use only against heavy armor, Panther, Tiger, or King Tiger. Don't waste them. Some joked that HVAP meant gold rounds, since each one cost almost as much as a sergeant's monthly pay. But to the men at the front, its value wasn't in dollars, it was in hope. They believed this shell could finally pierce the invincible wall that had haunted them since Normandy. At night, tankers passed HVAP, rounds between them like lucky charms. Some scratched words onto the casing for Panther, for Eddie, or simply the name of their hometown, reminders of why they still fought to survive. In a memo to the Pentagon, Fleischer wrote, "We are not just building ammunition, we are giving hope to the men at the front." Across the ocean, in the fog of Lorraine, Smoyer and his crew had no idea that a shipment of tungsten had just arrived at Cherbourg. The first HVAP rounds were already rolling toward the front lines in dusty GMC trucks. Each crate marked in red Tungsten M93. That same night, back in Watervliet, Fleischer stood alone on the factory balcony, watching black smoke rise from the chimneys. He knew no one would remember his name. But if, somewhere in France, a Sherman survived after hitting a Panther, then every bead of sweat, every sleepless night, every ounce of tungsten would be worth it. In a war decided by steel and speed, one small shell now carried the weight of an army's faith, and when it left the barrel, slicing through the mist with a scream of metal and destiny, history began to turn. On the morning of September 19th, 1944, the countryside of Lorraine, France, lay shrouded in fog as thick as milk. The damp earth reeked of burnt fuel and rotting grass. Among the misty cornfields, Sergeant Lafayette, Pool, Smoyer, gunner of an M4, a 3 Sherman from Company 3rd Armored Division, Spearhead sat on the gun barrel, holding a cup of cold coffee. He gazed ahead toward the dirt road leading to the village of Arras, where the trees and lingering smoke from last night's barrage faded into the pale morning haze. For a week, his unit had been in constant combat with German forces retreating from Nancy. Intelligence reported that a new enemy formation, Panzer Brigade 111, had entered the area, equipped with Panther G tanks, the most formidable armor in the Whenever the word Panther was mentioned, no one spoke further. Everyone knew that name meant one thing: a Stulel. Smoyer climbed down into the turret. Loader John DeRiggy was wiping the 76mm gun barrel, humming an old jazz tune under his breath. At the driver's seat, Sergeant Joe Tiger Arnold. Your now eyes fixed on the narrow viewing slit. In the commander's chair, Lieutenant Bill Reese bent over a crumpled map. Its pencil markings nearly faded in the bluish dawn light. "We'll hold this position," Reese said. "If a Panther shows up, hit it from range. Don't let it see us first." Smoyer nodded. He knew the odds. Back in Normandy, his Sherman had fired 3 shots into a Panther's side, all it bounced. Back then, they only had standard armor-piercing rounds, the kind American crews bitterly called hope and pray shells. But today was different. In the ammo rack behind DeRiggy rested 6 gleaming M93 HVAP rounds. Brand new, tungsten cord, silent as death on one of them. Smoyer had carved a single word with his knife. For Eddie. Eddie, the gunner who burned alive inside a Sherman hit just a week earlier. Around 8:30, the fog still clung thick to the fields. A low rumble echoed in the distance. Reese raised his binoculars, but saw only dark shapes moving slowly through the mist. "Tanks," he whispered. "Not oars." Smoyer slid into the gunner's seat and pressed his eye to the M71G sight. Through the glass, the scene looked dreamlike. A foggy field, blurred tree lines, and then a massive silhouette took shape. A sloped turret, a long, slender gun barrel. No mistaking it a Panther. Panther, 10 o'clock, ranged 800 yards. Reese reacted instantly. HVAP. DeRiggy snapped open the ammo crate, pulling out the silver-tipped round. A chill ran up his arm as he hefted it into place. HVAP. Loaded, he shouted, slamming the breech shut. Smoyer adjusted his aim. Through the sight, the Panther loomed forward, its yellow-gray hull ghostly in the fog. It hadn't seen them yet. One chance. That was all. He took a deep breath. His heartbeat slowed. His finger tightened on the trigger. Boom! The Sherman rocked from recoil. The shot streaked off in a trail of white smoke. For a second, no one breathed. Then Reese shouted, "Hit!" Through the scope, Smoyer saw flames burst from the Panther's flank. The beast lurched to a halt, belching black smoke. For the first time, they watched the hunter fall. DeRiggy stared in disbelief. We actually got through." Smoyer just smiled, fingers still resting on the trigger. 5 left, but the battlefield never pauses. From the left came another rumble. Clank, clank, clank. 2 more Panthers emerged from the fog, their 75mm guns sweeping like the gaze of death. Behind that haystack, "Move!" Reese barked. Dr. Arnold slammed the throttle. The Sherman jolted into motion, veering right into a ditch as an enemy shell exploded behind them, showering dirt and shrapnel across the thin armor. Smoyer swung the turret, lining up again. Through the sight, one Panther was turning its gun toward them. If it fired first, the Sherman would be a coffin. HVAP, he yelled. DeRiggy loaded fast, hands trembling. Loaded. The second round roared. The projectile tore across 600 yards, punching clean through the Panther's side armor. A brief flash, a puff of flame, then the turret hatch blew open and a burning figure tumbled out. Reese gritted his teeth. God help them. Fire again. The third Panther halted, pivoting to aim. Its shot slammed into the dirt just meters ahead, coating the Sherman in earth. Smoyer adjusted again. This one's for the front plate. He squeezed the trigger. The third HVAP shrieked through the air and struck the Panther's glacis. The spot no regular shell could penetrate. A metallic crack rang out. Then the tank erupted, fire spewing from the engine deck. Inside the Sherman, the air reeked of cordite, oil, and smoke. No one spoke. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint whine of the turret motor in the wind, whistling through the gun slit. Smoyer looked down at the spent casings rolling across the floor, their brass dulled by soot. His hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the realization that, for the first time, they weren't helpless. By noon, the fog began to lift. Under the weak sunlight, the fields around Aracourt revealed a grim tableau. Wrecked tanks scattered like charred beasts, their tracks twisted, hulls smoldering. Reese climbed onto the turret, surveying the scene as the wind stirred the ash. 3 of them, he murmured. 3 in one morning. Smoyer looked up at the sky, where thin clouds drifted through the pale sun. For a fleeting moment, the distant thunder of guns faded away, leaving only the steady rumble of the Sherman's engine. Low, resolute. The war was far from over, but today they had proven something. The Panther was no longer untouchable. Behind him, Dirigi picked up the last HVAP round and gazed at it as though it were sacred. He slid it gently back into its case, brushed the shell with his hand, and said softly, "Save it for next time." Smoyer didn't reply. He just stared across the field, where smoke still curled from the burning wrecks. In his mind echoed the sound of that morning's first shot, the one that tore through the fog, carrying the hopes of 6 men who had only 6 chances to live. That day, in the white mist of Aracourt, American steel spoke for the first time, and from that moment on, the war had changed color, no longer a desperate retreat, but a new kind of hunt, where the prey had become the hunter. The night after the Battle of Aracourt, a cold wind swept across the fields of Lorraine, whispering through the charred wrecks of tanks that lay tilted in the mud. Here and there, flames still flickered weakly inside the burned-out hulls of German armor. The air was thick with the stench of scorched metal, oil, and human flesh, a smell that clung to every breath. Along the edge of the forest, the Shermans of Company E stood in a ragged line, their hulls streaked with soot and mud, empty shell casings scattered across the ground. Smoyer sat atop his turret, leaning back against the still warm barrel of the 76mm gun. He watched the smoke drift upward, his eyes fixed on the pale, colorless sky. The wind tugged at his dust-kicked hair. In the distance, medics moved among the wrecks, carrying the wounded away. From time to time, a low groan mingled with the rumble of a truck engine. He had just knocked out 3 Panthers, an extraordinary feat on paper. Yet inside, Smoyer felt no pride, only an empty, quiet hollow. Lieutenant Reese approached, a dented coffee pot in hand. He set it down beside him. "You did good." "Loaf?" "Thank you," Sir Smoyer murmured. Reese sat beside him, drew on a cigarette, and stared out at the misty field. "You know," he said slowly, "today I realized something strange. When that first HVAP hit the Panther, I didn't feel happy. Just relieved, like I'd been spared." Smoyer nodded. "Yeah. Me too." They sat in silence for a long time. In the wind, there was a sound like the earth itself exhaling. That night, Smoyer couldn't sleep. He lay inside the tank's cramped hull, his back against the cold steel. In his hand was the last HVAP shell, the reserve, kept for emergencies. The beam of his flashlight glinted off its silvery casing, making it seem to glow faintly in the dark. He thought of Eddie Slovic, his former gunner. They had once sat side by side in Normandy, counting shells in the crate and laughing about going home. Then, one German shell had turned Eddie into a ball of fire in seconds. When Smoyer opened the hatch, there was nothing left but blackened flesh, and the smell lingered in his clothes for days. Ever since, every time he saw a Panther, he saw Eddie burning inside it. He no longer fought for victory but for debt. And yet today, watching another Panther burn, all he felt was tired. The fire's reflection in his eyes no longer carried triumph, only confusion. If every shell means a life, how many have we taken? He didn't speak it aloud, but the question echoed in his mind, hollow, endless, like a whisper in a tunnel. The next morning, As the column rolled east, they passed the smoldering carcasses of panthers. Each wreck lay like a dead beast in the field. Paint burned away, gun barrels twisted by heat, streaks of dried blood marking the armor plates. Dirigi peered through the periscope and muttered, "Christ, they were just men too." Smoyer said nothing. His chest tightened. Inside those blackened tanks were faces, mothers, and hopes not so different from their own. The line between us and them suddenly felt unbearably thin. That afternoon, the company halted in a small village north of Erich, where only a few brick walls still stood. The Americans made camp in the ruins of a church. Amid the collapsed walls, laughter broke out now and then, faint, exhausted laughter. They ate canned meat, smoked cigarettes, and talked about anything but war. Dirigi told stories about his mother's bakery in Brooklyn. Arnold talked about his old dog, Max. Reese said nothing, his eyes drifting between the map and the shattered bell tower, as if searching for answers among the ruins. Smoyer listened, but stayed silent. In his mind, the image of the burning panther replayed again and again, like a film stuck on loop. He saw German hands clawing at the hatch, saw flames swallow them whole. He told himself it was war, that he had no choice. Yet guilt clung to him like smoke that refused to clear. 3 days later, their unit was pulled back to a war correspondent from Stars and Stripes arrived to take photos. They cleaned the mud off Smoyer's Sherman, propped it on a rise, and told him to stand beside the gun. "Smile, Sergeant. You're the hero of Ericourt." Smoyer forced a grin. As the shutter clicked, he suddenly felt detached, as if the man in the photo wasn't him. The dark lens of the camera looked back like an empty eye, and they wondered, was someone on the other side of the front taking a photo like this for a man who died yesterday? Afterward, Reese said quietly, "They need pictures like these, so the folks back home believe we're winning." Smoyer looked down at his oil-stained hands. "But are we really winning, sir?" Reese didn't answer. His eyes held both pity and weariness. That night, rain fell. As it pattered softly against the turret, Smoyer opened his notebook and wrote a few short lines. "I'm no longer afraid of panthers. I'm afraid of myself." The ink blurred under the raindrops, but he kept writing. "Every time I pull the trigger, I see a face, not an enemy's, just a man's. I want to believe the HVAP round saves lives, not ends them. But war doesn't care. It only devours." He closed the notebook and looked up through the hatch. The rain washed the mud from the tank's armor, but not the feeling inside. In the distance, artillery still thundered, marking the rhythm of the battles yet to come. Ericourt was only the beginning. Ahead lay Germany, and storms. Greater still, Smoyer took a deep breath and touched the last HVAP shell. Its silver gleam had dimmed in the rain, like a fading light of faith amid the gray smoke of war. And in that moment, he understood the true turning point of war wasn't on the battlefield, but within the soldier's heart, when he began to realize that to survive, he might have to surrender a piece of his own humanity. March 1945. The German city of Cologne lay in ruins, flattened by American bombing. Only the blackened skeletons of buildings and the twin spires of its cathedral cast long shadows beneath a leaden sky. Amid the rubble, the distant thud of artillery echoed dry, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of a dying beast. The first M26 Pershing of the U.S. Army had just arrived, a herald of a new tank era, armed with a powerful 90mm gun that far outclassed the Shermans. Yet, among the armored column entering Cologne that morning, one old Sherman still rolled forward, its hull scratched and yellowed, olive paint worn thin, and a steel patch welded over a past shell hole. It was the M4A3. The Lucky Lady, commanded by Sergeant Lafayette G. Smoyer. He had survived Normandy, Lorraine, and the frozen Ardennes. Each battlefield had taken a friend. Now, only 3 of the original crew remained. None spoke as their Sherman crawled through the shattered streets of Cologne. Once a proud German city, now a cathedral of ash and smoke in the commander's seat. Lieutenant Bill Reese received the order. Advance to the central square. Clear out resistance. Every corner could be a trap. Smoyer adjusted his sight, glancing at the ammo rack beside him. Only 2 HVAP tungsten rounds remained, the same 2 he had carried since Lorraine, through the Ardennes, and all the way here. He ran his fingers over the cold, silver casing. To him, it wasn't just a weapon. It was memory of those who had fallen, of the promise that they would survive to tell their story. By noon, as the column neared the intersection by Cologne Cathedral, Reese caught movement to the right. Tank. 3 o'clock. Smoyer swung the turret. Through the scope, past the collapsed walls and drifting dust, a shape materialized. A Panzerkampfwagen. German Panther. Its yellow paint, scuffed and filthy. Lurking behind a corner, its long 75mm gun was already aimed their way. Panther. Range. 900 yards. Reese shouted. Luff. Do what you do best. Smoyer's hands tightened. Sweat trickled down his neck, despite the chill. Loader John Dirigi rammed the first HVP into the breech clack. A sharp, metallic sound. HVAP. Loaded. Smoyer steadied his aim. Through the sight, the Panther looked like a predator ready to pounce. He drew a long breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. Boom! The blast thundered through the square. The tungsten round streaked through dust and brick, slamming into the Panther's flank. A plume of black smoke burst out, but the German tank still moved, its turret swinging toward them. Reload, Reese barked. Dirigi shoved the last round into the chamber, voice trembling. This is the last one, Loaf. Smoyer nodded. He waited for the Panther to expose its front armor. The brief moment between hunter and hunted, time seemed to stop. He thought of Eddie, of the friends who didn't make it. Everything came down to one pull of the trigger. Boom! The second shot struck square on the Panther's glacis. A flash, then fire erupted from the turret hatch, rolling skyward like a black pillar. For a few seconds, the Panther stood motionless. Ten it, burn it, bright, fierce, final. The reflection of the flames flickered across Smoyer's face through the gun sight. Weary, calm, and wordless. Reese clapped him on the shoulder. You just saved the whole column, Loff. Smoyer said nothing. He simply exhaled, watching the burning wreck through the scope, releasing the weight he had carried for 2 long years. Across the street, a U.S. Army Signal Corps cameraman captured the entire duel on a 35mm Bell and Howell camera from a nearby rooftop. The film lasted barely half a minute, but it would become one of the most iconic clips of World War II, the moment a Sherman destroyed a Panther in Cologne, when the footage was shown in New York. In April 1945, the audience erupted in cheers. They saw a dazzling victory. American steel triumphing in the enemy's city. But no one knew who the men inside the tank were. No one knew that the gunner who fired that shot didn't smile, didn't celebrate. He simply looked down at the empty HVAP shell rolling on the floor. The round that ended an era and began a legacy. After the war, Lafayette Smoyer returned home to Pennsylvania. He rarely spoke of combat. In his garage hung a black and white photo from Aracourt beneath it. An empty HVAP shell polished to a dull shine, like a monument. Years later, when historians visited, he told them quietly, "We never thought we were heroes. We were just trying to stay alive. But that tungsten round, it gave us hope. And in war, hope is rarer than tungsten." He smiled faintly, eyes distant. It didn't just pierce armor, it pierced fear. And that's what really mattered. Today, at the U.S. Army Museum in Fort Benning, Georgia, a single M93 HVAP round sits on display beside a Sherman model and a small plaque that reads, "This tungsten round saved lives, not by killing faster, but by giving men the belief that they could fight back." Beside it hangs an old photo of Smoyer in 1945, standing next to his tank. He isn't looking at the camera, just gazing into the distance, where the smoke of war still lingered. People say tungsten is the metal of strength, unbending, unbreakable. But for those who once held it in their hands, it was more than that. It was the metal of memory, solid as resolve, heavy as conscience, and coldly bright as faith in the darkest times. And somewhere, deep within the archives of the Smithsonian, rests the real HVAP shell, the last one Smoyer never fired. The silver casing has dulled with age, but the small engraving remains clear. For Eddie, a single, silent shell that has outlasted war, telling the story of a generation that learned to kill to survive, yet never lost the fragile truth that even in the coldest steel, a human heart can still stay warm if it holds on to hope. That is the true legacy of the tungsten bullet.